Hello everybody, it's me, Fiona Timms, author of now 3 White Zulu books, and I'm going to read some from book 3, White Zulu, The Wanderer, and this is White Zulu book 3, chapter 4, My Second Wedding and Married Life in Stanger. The day passed very much like the previous one. It was stifling hot. Oh, please excuse somebody's got a weed whacker outside and he's trimming the edge of the lawn, and it's a very noisy thing. And his timing is perfect. Every time I open my mouth, he starts whacking the weeds. So we'll just either have to put up with him, or one of these days he'll go away. He shouldn't be too long, but it is annoying, and please forgive me for that. It was stiflingly hot and humid, due to the fact that the town was set in a dip between the ocean and the hills behind us. A cooling breeze came off the sea and passed overhead, and the hills behind the town, being elevated, were a lot cooler. Stanger began to feel like a hellhole. The only air-conditioned buildings in the town were the 2 banks, Standard and Barclays banks, and Tom worked for the latter as a cashier or clerk. The noise coming from the mosque was relentless, as was the constant hooting and occasional crash from the road in front of our flat. The smell from the bakery soon became sickly, and I felt quite ill when I had to do any shopping and was forced to negotiate Alistair's pushchair, weaving it through the many stalls selling spices, curry powder, and fruits like mango and banana, the skins of which lay all over the pavement, creating a slippery minefield for pedestrians. The strong smell of onions, which normally I had previously rather liked, now made me feel nauseous, and from the time I woke up and showered, I was slick with sweat for the rest of the day until I had a bath in the evenings, and even then, as I was drying myself, began to sweat again. There was something else bothering me, and I went to see a GP in one of the few town's white doctors' practices. After taking tests, a few days later, the surgery called me back in. "Congratulations," said the doctor. "You're going to be a mother again." This explained why all those odors made me feel so sick. Every night that week, Tom had been coming home drunk at 10 o'clock. Now, with this, just the explanation that he'd been having a few drinks in the bank bar. Frustrated and angry, I tackled him. "All that time that you were courting me, from the day we met until the day we got married, you managed to get in your car and drive for 2 hours directly after work down to Durban to see me. Now, how is it that you can't drive the 5 minutes back from the bank to come and spend the evening with us?" He was unabashed. "Oh, we've always had a few drinks after work. It helps us unwind." But having a few drinks at 5 o'clock is one thing. Drinking up until 10 o'clock at night is another thing. What were we supposed to do all evening on our own? "Don't worry, I promise I'll come home straight after work this afternoon, and then we can spend some time together, and I can play with Alistair before he goes to bed. Mollified, I believed him, and now I had some very exciting news to tell him. 5 o'clock came and went, and so did the rest of the evening. As usual, I ate my half of the congealing supper, leaving his in the warmer drawer for him to throw away the next day. When I tackled Tom on the subject of eating dinner with us in the flat, he said he'd usually have a curry and rice at the bank. To me, this didn't make much sense, as it was probably the worst thing a diabetic should be eating, especially a type A one, the very most serious one. But I had noticed that after his nightly binge on beer, he upped his dose of insulin to almost double to counteract all the carbohydrates he'd been taking in. It seemed to me a very haphazard and seriously dangerous way to manage his very serious condition. But he said he'd been doing it since he was 18, and I believed him now. That evening, I went through all the normal rituals and then sat and waited. And Tom, at 10 o'clock, came staggering in as usual. "You're going to be a father," I said to him loudly, so he could take it in through the fog of drink. He mumbled something and lurched past me to pass out on the bed. I was devastated. Apparently, he couldn't even keep one promise as important as this one. The next morning, I told him again that we were expecting a baby. It was actually something I had planned. Since Alistair was getting on for 3 years old, it made no sense to wait very long before having another baby, as I didn't want the gap between them to be so big, or to be too big. So I had taken no precautions on our honeymoon, and bingo, there was another baby on the way. Tom appeared to be delighted. Apparently, he hadn't taken it in the night before, as he'd been too drunk. Is he going to change his ways? I asked myself. I did not relish the thought of effectively being a single parent to a baby as well as a lively little boy. "I'll come back early and we can celebrate the new baby," volunteered Tom. But the day dragged along. I was starting to feel more and more sick, and it was as much as I could do to look after Alistair and keep him amused in that stifling little flat while I either threw up or rested. On other days, I put him in my car and took him down to the beach, which had a very pleasant sea pool, although quite a rough sea. I could swim with him in the sea pool, as he could now swim like a fish. Also, there were other mothers with small children with whom I could sit and chat while we kept our eye on our offspring, playing in the sand with their buckets and spades. True to form, Tom did not come home. In fact, that night he only got in at about 1 o'clock in the morning. He was absolutely incoherent and did spend the night passed out in his clothes. When I tackled him in the morning, he mumbled something about celebrating the fact that he was going to become a father with all his mates at the bank. I was becoming very frustrated disillusioned and angry with him. Perhaps our weekends together would be a mitigating factor. After all, from almost the day I had met him at my sister's dinner party, he had devoted every weekend coming down from Stanger to Durban to spend the entire weekend with us. I'm playing golf this weekend. There's a tournament on at the Stanger Country Club. It's a weekend affair, and we start at midday on Saturday, going right through till Sunday night when there's prize giving. You can come to that if you want and meet some of the wives. And what am I supposed to do with Alistair? I asked. He seemed nonplussed. Oh, I don't know. Bring him with you and let him sleep in the back of the car, he suggested. And so that's how I spent my weekend. By myself with Alistair feeling queasy and then struggling into something cool and smart to go and meet Tom at the club on the Sunday evening. There, I discovered that he was in the main bar and I and the other wives were relegated to the ladies' bar, a far smaller, rather bleak, room decorated with nothing but a few chairs and serviced by a waiter whom we could summons by ringing an interleading electric bell, and he would take our orders. He would then approach our husbands who brought the drinks and return with them on a tray. I wasn't drinking at all. I noticed that quite a few of the wives had brought their own children, some of whom were not much older than Alistair, and these were running around playing on the bowling green, just as I had done after polo tournaments when Mum and Dad were drinking in the bar, our nannies asleep in the back of the car, and we children using the frost on the bowling greens as a skating rink in our slippers. Naturally, I saw nothing of Tom that night. The first few weeks of our married life carried on in this vein. Tom went to work and never came home before 10 o'clock that night and never sober. I was on my own again with Alistair, but this time a long way away from my family, and I didn't know a single living soul in Stanger. I was suffering terribly from morning sickness and all the different smells wafting in to our stifling little flat, making it far worse. If I could manage it, I put Alistair into the blazing hot car, which had to stand outside in the full sun between 50 and 40 degrees centigrade, open all the windows and drive him down to the beach where we could both get respite in the cool sea pool, or just play on the sand with a cooling breeze coming off the ocean. Again, there was company in the way of young mothers supervising their own offspring, sitting in groups and chatting. A young blonde woman waved me over and introduced herself. Hello, I'm Jill, and these are my two children, Leslie and Richie. The little girl was just about a year older than Alistair, and the little boy slightly younger. They all played happily in the wet sand, building a dam with their buckets and spades. And Jill chatted to me. Her husband owned a fishing boat and supplied his own shop with freshly caught fish every day. They had rented a beach cottage just behind where we were sitting and lived there. I looked enviously at the cool bungalow surrounded by enormous Natal fig trees to shade it, and the huge lawn. It looked exactly the sort of place I would have liked to have lived in. And I asked her what she paid, and it was ridiculously low. So I had an idea. The following morning, I collared Tom just before he left for work and was still relatively sober. I told him all about Jill and the beach cottage. Do we have to live in the middle of Stanger in this flat? I asked. Or can we rent somewhere that is reasonably priced and far cooler, like Blythedale Beach? Tom pondered this for a moment and said he would make inquiries. The next morning I tackled him again, asked about renting a private residence. Actually, the bank subsidizes the rent in these cases, so not only would we be paying a very low rent, but the bank would be paying most of it. This appealed to Tom enormously, and so we moved out of the stuffy flat. George had never endured a single day in it, as he was either always in the air-conditioned bank or on the golf course, having found a perfectly adequate and basic beach cottage for rent right on the beach at Blythedale. There was another development. George announced that he would come home every day for lunch, ostensibly so that he could see his new family during the day. I agreed to this with alacrity, as I thought perhaps he was going to change his ways. And so we moved into the cool beach cottage with its front veranda and huge lawn, which swept right down to a bit of bush through which there was a short sandy path leading straight onto the beach. At last we were cool. There were no smells, no frequent howling from the mosque. The only sound was the sea and the roaring of the breakers as they crashed onto the beach at high tide or hissed into the sand at low tide. There was an enormous Natal fig tree to shade the parking area at the back. There was also accommodation for a live-in maid, and I started asking all around the other Zulus working in the area as maids and garden boys for a woman to come and live and work for me. Only one who could speak Zulu, one who could speak only Zulu. A smiling middle-aged woman came shyly to the back door the morning after we'd moved in. She said her name was Grena and she wanted the job as she had a big family to feed. I liked her immediately and took her on to do the housework and laundry while I did the cooking and looked after Alistair. Also, she was company for me. The routine started as every day at 1 o'clock, George would come racing in to park under the fig tree, eat lunch, spend some time with us, and then shoot off back to the bank, not to be seen again until probably the next morning, or 10 o'clock that night if he woke me up crashing and banging in the bedroom, and very much the worse for wear. At nights, because it was cooler, the mosquitoes didn't bother us quite so much either. This had all sounded good in theory, but I hadn't realized that Tom refused to eat any cold food, nor would he touch any form of salad, rather like my father. So at 11 o'clock every morning on the beach, I would have to gather up a protesting Alistair, remove him from his games with Leslie and Richie, say goodbye to Jill, and rush home to start peeling potatoes and making stews, minced dishes, or cooking chicken casseroles, or everything else in the way of hot food, all in the baking heat. It took a huge chunk out of my morning, the very best time, when the tides were right and the kids were playing. Tom had left at 2 o'clock, and I was a washed out rag. Sorry, 1 o'clock. 2 o'clock. I was a washed out rag and only good to lie on the bed and try and cope with my morning sickness. Alistair would not sleep in the afternoons. He never did, even from the day he arrived on the farm. And everybody else in their heads put their heads down to rest during the worst of the heat after lunch. Not he. This lively little boy would have to be entertained and kept quiet while Mum and Dad had their obligatory siesta. It was up to me to amuse him. I kept up my friendship with Jill and eventually met her husband Jack, who had the fishing enterprise. Our cottage was quite close to the Umvoti River mouth, where the sea was calm enough to allow the fishing boats to come racing inshore and up the beach. Some days I walked Alistair down along the beach to see the boats and choose a nice fresh fish from the bounty that came in. Other times, Jack would pop in and drop off a grunter or yellowtail tail, or even a shad, so fresh, and all of which provided the most delicious eating. At weekends, while George was playing golf, I would invite Jack, Jill, and the children over for afternoon tea so that the kids could play with the football on our great big but slightly sloping lawn. Often they stayed for an evening beer, the three of us sitting on our veranda watching the big breakers come roaring in to dissolve to foam on the beach and enjoying the cool breeze blowing on our faces. Other times they invited me over to their cottage, which was set slightly back from the sea and had a narrow road running in front of it which led to our cottage. There were approximately 20 to 30 beach houses and cottages lining that single road, and that was what made up Blythedale Beach. There was no hotel, no shop, nothing there, but it was a 10 to 15-minute drive into Stanger, so that didn't matter. I was sitting on my own as usual, sipping a flat Coke. It was early evening. Alistair had gone to bed already, but I had a long and interminable evening ahead of me by myself. I did some calculations and realized that now I was married to Tom, I saw less of him than I had when he'd been courting me. I was effectively a single parent and now expecting a second baby. And with a sinking heart, I realized that my marriage was doomed. Nothing was going to change. We had arguments and fights, and Tom had made promise after promise, but nothing came of it. I was alone, as alone now as I'd been as a single widow with one child, and now I had another one on the way. To cap it all, a week later, I had a phone call from Mum. I just thought you needed to know, but Andy died yesterday. He'd shut himself in his car, threaded a hose pipe from the exhaust into the passenger area, and left the engine running. He died of asphyxiation. I was devastated. While I had been examining my own predicament and of having come full circle and wondering how I could get out of this abortion of a marriage, my thoughts had turned to Andy, and I wondered if he was as unhappy as I was. Idly, I had planned to contact him and find out how he was getting on, and whether he and I could create a life together, as he was like a brother to me. It was too late now. I've told you all about Andy before. He'd been my childhood friend since we were toddlers. He'd been like a brother to me, and we adored each other. I often went up to spend time with him in Rosebank, Johannesburg, and Andy had spent many a week at the farm to enjoy company with me. After Fred had died, I spent a week or two with Andy while his mother drove us via Plettenberg Bay to his new university in Cape Town. The last time I had seen him, we had both been crying on each other's shoulders and promising to stay in touch as much and as often as possible. Now the second love of my life was dead. That's all for today. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much to John for helping me through this, and also Sean for uploading these videos for me. And you'll find a lot more information, photos of Andy, and my other books as well. I've only written 3 White Zulu, but I've got several other aspects of my life which I've described, most amusing, some of them. And you'll find them on the website www.whitezulu.com. And thank you so much for being patient throughout the weed whacker and everything else that went on. I'll see you all next time. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.